There's a moment right before something shatters, when you realize you can't stop it. Like a glass slipping from your fingers, suspended in the air for half a second before gravity does its job. You already know the sound it's going to make when it hits the floor. You know it won't be the same afterward. That's exactly how I felt the night my wife said the words that turned me into a ghost in my own home. We weren't even having a major fight. Just one of those simmering arguments that happen when two people have spent too much time resenting each other in silence. It was about something stupid, laundry, I think. Or maybe the bills. I can't even remember now. What I do remember is the way her face twisted when she said it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. She wanted to hurt me, and she did. I felt it like a punch straight to my gut. But unlike a punch, which fades with time, this pain started spreading. It reached into parts of me I didn't even know could feel broken. I didn't yell back. I didn't throw anything. I didn't storm out. I just stopped. I stopped talking. Stopped looking at her. Stopped existing in the way I used to. And she noticed. I could see it in the way her face softened a second too late. The way she reached for me as if she wanted to take it back. But words don't work like that. Once they're out there, they belong to the person they were spoken to. That night, I didn't sleep beside her. I laid on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment again and again, trying to understand how we got here, trying to convince myself it wasn't as bad as it felt. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Something had cracked between us. And no matter how many times she apologized the next day, no matter how much she tried to act like it didn't happen, I knew. I just didn't know that this was only the beginning. The morning after felt unreal, like I had woken up in someone else's life. The couch left a dull ache in my back, but it wasn't the physical discomfort that weighed on me. It was the suffocating silence. I could hear her moving around in the kitchen. The clinking of plates, the sound of the fridge opening and closing. These were normal sounds, things I had heard 1,000 times before. But today they felt different. Forced, like she was deliberately making noise to fill the space between us. I stayed on the couch longer than I needed to, staring at the ceiling, trying to gather my thoughts. But no matter how many times I replayed the argument, I couldn't make sense of it. What hurt the most wasn't just the words she had said. It was the realization that she had meant them. Maybe she regretted saying them out loud, but deep down, they had been sitting there, waiting for the right moment to surface. I finally got up, walking into the kitchen without a word. She looked up immediately, eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Nervousness? A plea for me to say something first? I didn't. She cleared her throat. I made coffee. I nodded, taking a mug and pouring myself a cup, avoiding her eyes the whole time. I could feel her watching me, waiting, hoping I would act like everything was normal. But it wasn't. It never would be again. She let out a small sigh and leaned against the counter. Look, about last night. I stiffened. I didn't want to hear an apology. I didn't want to hear excuses. I was upset, she continued. I didn't mean. I finally looked at her. Yes, you did. The way her face fell confirmed what I already knew. She wanted to take it back, but not because it wasn't true, only because she saw what it did to me. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't going to break in front of her. Not now. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. She tried again. I let out a dry laugh. There's only one way to take something like that. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked afraid. Maybe not of me, but of what she had done. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I feel like you don't see me anymore. Like you don't care about. I set my mug down harder than necessary. So that's your excuse? You wanted to get my attention. So you tore me down. She flinched but didn't deny it. I shook my head, exhaling slowly. You got my attention, all right? The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked away, leaving my coffee untouched. For the rest of the day, we barely spoke. We moved around the house like strangers, pretending we weren't avoiding each other. That night, I didn't go back to our bed, and she didn't ask me to. She didn't even try. That's when I knew this wasn't just a fight. This was something deeper. Something that wouldn't just fade over time. And I had no idea what to do about it. Days passed, but the weight of that night never left. It lingered in the air like a fog, thick and suffocating, pressing down on every interaction we had. She tried at first. She'd ask me how my day was. She'd send me a text while I was at work. Short, simple things like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Thinking about you." I never ignored her, but my responses were clipped, emotionless. I didn't know how else to talk to her anymore. At home, she started trying harder, cooking my favorite meals, suggesting we watch something together like we used to. But I couldn't sit next to her on the couch without feeling that sentence crawling back into my mind, sinking its claws into me. So I made excuses. "I'm tired. I have a lot of work to catch up on. Maybe later." Later never came. And eventually she stopped asking. The silence grew, not just in words but in actions. We stopped eating together. Stopped lingering in the same room. Stopped touching. I would go to bed long after she did, making sure she was already asleep so I wouldn't have to climb into bed next to her. And if I did, I made sure to stay on my side as far away as possible. She noticed. One night, I woke up to find her sitting up in bed, staring at me in the dark. "You don't even look at me anymore," she whispered. I pretended I was too tired to answer. She didn't believe me. Neither did I. The signs I chose to ignore. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I noticed something else. Something small at first, but unsettling. She was on her phone more. Not just scrolling before bed, but in the middle of conversations, in the quiet moments when she would normally reach for my hand or lean against me. Now she was distracted, distant in a way that mirrored my own behavior. At first, I thought it was guilt. Maybe she was searching for advice, looking for ways to fix this. But as time passed, I couldn't ignore the changes. She started dressing differently. More effort in her outfits, makeup on days when she used to stay in sweats. She started leaving the house more, vague about where she was going. When I asked, her answers were light, casual. "Oh, just running errands. Met up with some friends. Needed some fresh air." Maybe a better man would have confronted it sooner. But I wasn't a better man. I was a broken one, and I had no idea what was coming next. There's a moment when you realize something has changed forever. At first, it's just a feeling, an unsettling whisper in the back of your mind, telling you that something is off. You try to ignore it, brush it away, tell yourself you're overthinking. But eventually, the signs become impossible to overlook. I started noticing the way she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. How she'd angle the screen away from me, her fingers moving quickly, typing messages she never mentioned. One night, I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink and caught her sitting at the counter, staring at her screen, smiling. It wasn't the kind of absent-minded smile you give when you see a funny meme or a cute video. It was different, soft, warm, familiar, like the kind of smile she used to give me. She didn't notice me right away, and in that split second, I saw something I couldn't unsee. The way she bit her lip, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear like she was nervous. Flirting. My stomach twisted. I cleared my throat, making her jump. She fumbled with her phone, locking it before setting it face down on the counter. "You scared me," she said, forcing a laugh. "Didn't hear you come in." I didn't respond. I just walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to ask. I didn't. I wasn't ready for the answer. Avoidance or denial. After that night, I started paying closer attention. She was gone more. Her errands took longer. Her explanations felt thinner, more rehearsed. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear the truth. Instead, I started testing the waters. One evening, as she was getting ready to leave, I leaned against the doorframe and asked, "Where you headed?" She hesitated just for a second. "Just out with some friends." I nodded. "Which friends?" Again, a pause. Small but there. "You don't know them." That was new. She grabbed her purse and kissed my cheek before heading out the door. It felt performative, like she was trying to reassure me without realizing that her actions were doing the opposite. I didn't try to stop her. Instead, I sat down on the couch and stared at the door long after she was gone. And for the first time, I let myself acknowledge what I had been avoiding for weeks. She wasn't just pulling away. She was already gone. I used to believe that when a marriage crumbles, it happens all at once. One final, catastrophic moment where everything explodes and leaves nothing but ruin. But the truth is, it doesn't work like that. It's slow, quiet. It happens in the little things first. The small shifts that you don't recognize until it's too late. That's how it happened to us. The night I saw her smiling at her phone, I felt something break inside me. But I still wasn't ready to face what was coming. I told myself it was just in my head, that I was being paranoid. Maybe she was just texting an old friend. Maybe she had a new group she didn't think I'd care about. Maybe. But the truth was, I already knew. She wasn't mine anymore. She just hadn't told me yet. The lies we tell ourselves. The next few weeks were torture. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't say. We still went through the motions of a marriage. We still lived under the same roof, shared the same bed. But there was a chasm between us that neither of us had the courage to acknowledge. And then the late nights started. First, she had excuses. Got caught up with work. Went to dinner with a few friends. Just needed some space to clear my head. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But the problem with lies is that they always fall apart under scrutiny. One night, she told me she was going out with a few coworkers. I nodded, pretending not to care, even though my stomach twisted at the thought. I watched her leave. Watched the way she took her time in the mirror before heading out. The way she smoothed her dress. Checked her phone one last time before slipping it into her bag. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my keys. I had never been the kind of husband who checked up on his wife, never felt the need to. But that night, something in me refused to sit still. I didn't follow her immediately. Instead, I waited an hour, two, long enough that she would have already been wherever she was going. And then I drove. I had no idea where I was going. No plan. Just instinct. Until I saw her car. It wasn't parked outside a restaurant. It wasn't in a well-lit public place. It was outside an apartment complex I had never seen before. And her car wasn't the only one there. Standing in the dark. I should have left. I should have turned the car around and gone home. Pretended I never saw it. But I didn't. Instead, I parked down the street and waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. I told myself I was being stupid. That maybe she was visiting a friend. Maybe there was some explanation that made sense. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The moment I saw the front door open and her silhouette appear in the dim glow of the hallway light, I knew. She wasn't alone. A man stepped out behind her. Tall, confident, too familiar with the way his hand rested on the small of her back as they laughed about something I couldn't hear. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look hesitant. She looked happy. And that was the part that killed me the most. The drive home. I don't remember the drive back. I must have made it home somehow, but my mind was blank, a void of nothingness. The only thing I remember is standing in our bedroom, looking at the bed we once shared, and realizing how unfamiliar it felt. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had moved on while still pretending to be my wife. And I had been too blind, too hopeful to see it. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the darkened room, replaying the moment over and over in my head. She had chosen someone else. And now I had to figure out what came next. Morning came, but I didn't feel it. I hadn't slept. The hours had passed in a blur. And by the time the first traces of light crept through the blinds, I was still sitting in the same spot. Numb. Empty. She came home just as the sun was rising. I heard the front door click open, the quiet rustling of her keys dropping onto the table by the entrance. Her footsteps were hesitant, careful, like she was afraid to wake me. She didn't know I had been awake all night. I heard her stop outside the bedroom. A pause. A breath. Then the door creaked open, and I felt her presence before I saw her. She slipped inside, moving with the cautious grace of someone who didn't want to be caught. I could feel her standing there, just a few feet away, waiting to see if I would stir, if I would acknowledge her. I didn't. She let out a quiet sigh and tiptoed toward the bathroom, the sound of the shower turning on a moment later. I sat there for a long time, listening to the water run, imagining her washing away the night before, scrubbing off the scent of someone else's skin. And still I didn't move. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders, she finally noticed me. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice careful, measured. I turned my head just enough to look at her. Not a word, not an expression, just looking. Something flickered in her eyes. "What's wrong?" I wanted to laugh at the question. What's wrong? What a ridiculous thing to ask when she already knew the answer. But I wasn't ready to have that conversation. Not yet. Instead, I stood, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and walked past her without a word. She didn't try to stop me. I left the house that morning without knowing where I was going. I just needed to be anywhere but there. I drove aimlessly, the city blurring past me, my mind replaying the night before like a sick, never-ending loop. Her laughter, the way she leaned into him, the way she looked happier than she had in months. She had checked out of our marriage long before I had noticed, and I had been nothing but a fool. The worst part was, I didn't even know what I wanted to do about it. I wasn't the type to scream, to break things, to demand answers I already knew. I was the type to suffer in silence. And she had counted on that. Hours later, when I finally forced myself to return home, she was in the kitchen, making dinner like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. She looked up when I walked in, her expression cautious. "Hey!" I nodded, stepping past her without another glance. I could feel her eyes on me as I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "You're being quiet," she said, setting down a plate. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch between us. She shifted. "Are you mad at me?" Finally, I met her gaze. "Should I be?" Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt. Panic. But she smothered it quickly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I set the glass down. "You tell me." The tension was suffocating. She stared at me, her fingers gripping the counter a little too tightly. "I don't understand what you're trying to say." I let out a quiet breath, feeling the weight of the past 24 hours pressing down on me. "I saw you last night." A single sentence. That's all it took for the color to drain from her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it. A flicker of panic crossed her features before she forced herself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "Do I need to explain?" Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, she looked small, exposed, like a cornered animal trying to decide if it should fight or flee. And I just stood there, waiting, letting her decide which it would be. She blinked rapidly, like she was trying to reset the moment, trying to convince herself she misheard me. But I saw the flash of panic in her eyes before she could hide it. That alone told me everything I needed to know. The room felt unbearably small, suffocating. The smell of whatever she had been cooking lingered in the air, but I couldn't focus on anything except the tightening in my chest. She licked her lips, her voice barely above a whisper. "Saw me, where?" I took my time answering, letting the silence sit between us, thick and unbearable. I wanted to see how long she could hold onto her act, how long she could keep pretending. I took a slow breath, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. Outside the apartment complex, I saw her flinch, just slightly, just enough. "I don't know what you don't." I cut her off, my voice steady. "Just don't." Her jaw clenched. I could see the wheels turning in her head, scrambling for a way out. Maybe she considered playing dumb, acting confused, maybe even turning it back on me. But she wasn't a good liar under pressure. I had known that about her since the day we met. The only thing she was good at was pretending something didn't exist until it was too late to fix it. She folded her arms, leaning against the counter as if that would steady her. "So, you followed me?" I huffed a bitter laugh. There it was. The first attempt at deflection. I didn't follow you. I drove past and I saw your car. I waited. And then I saw you. She inhaled sharply through her nose, looking away. I could see the conflict in her posture, the way her fingers twitched like she wanted to grab something, hold onto anything. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. I was just visiting a friend. Try again. She swallowed. You're overthinking this. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. Overthinking? That's funny, because from where I stood, it looked like you were with someone. And you weren't just visiting. Her face hardened, but I saw the cracks beneath it. Who is he? Her breath caught. She hadn't expected me to ask directly. I watched her hesitate, watch her mouth open, then close, her mind racing through her options. I could see the exact moment she realized there was no escape, no way to talk her way out of this. And then she did something I didn't expect. She exhaled shakily and dropped her gaze. It's not what you think. A tired, humorless chuckle escaped my throat. Then tell me what it is. She hesitated. I waited. Seconds passed. She bit her lip, avoiding my eyes. It's complicated. I let the words settle between us, feeling the weight of them sink into my bones. I was exhausted. I was done. I stepped back, running a hand through my hair, letting out a quiet, bitter sigh. You know what's funny? My voice was calm, too calm. You could have told me the truth and maybe I would have found a way to deal with it. Maybe I would have respected you for at least having the decency to be honest. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. But you didn't, I continued. You lied. Again. Even when you knew I already had the truth. Her bottom lip trembled. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed, a hollow sound. That's the difference between us. I don't believe in accidental betrayals. She opened her mouth, but I shook my head. Don't. Just don't. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that I barely heard her whisper my name. I didn't look back, because I already knew this wasn't something we could come back from. I left the kitchen, but this time I wasn't just walking away from the conversation. I was walking away from her. For so long, I had been stuck in limbo, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do, whether I was supposed to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. But at that moment, standing in the hallway of the house we once built together, I finally understood. This wasn't my burden to carry anymore. She had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. I packed a bag that night, just the essentials, clothes, my laptop, my passport. She stood in the doorway, watching, silent, unsure whether she had the right to say anything. She didn't. When I finally zipped the bag shut, I turned to face her one last time. I don't hate you, I said, and it was true. I didn't. Hate would have required energy, emotion, things I no longer wanted to waste on her. But I can't stay here. I can't live a life where I'm second to someone else. Her lips trembled, her eyes searching mine for something. Understanding, forgiveness, anything that would make her feel less like the villain in this story. But I had no more words left for her. I picked up my bag and walked past her. And just like that, I was free. The next few months were hard. People don't tell you that leaving a toxic situation doesn't immediately bring relief. It brings emptiness. A strange, unfamiliar silence where pain used to live. But little by little, that silence became peace. I got my own place. A small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I started working out again, eating better, reconnecting with friends I had let slip away when I was too busy trying to hold my marriage together. I realized that I hadn't lost something. I had gained something. I had gained myself back. And one evening, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a thought hit me. I was happy. Not in the way I had been before, not in a way that relied on someone else. I was happy because I had survived. Because I had walked away with my dignity intact. Because I had proven to myself that I was worth more than being someone's second choice. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what came next.